Okay, I'm here. Hello. 1 second. Let me just slide into frame real quick. Hello and welcome to long time no. This music's still getting a bit up there. Let's crank that down just a bit more. Hello, long time no book club. Welcome to the Sharkstream. If you're not familiar with this current format, this is the Sharkstream Book Club. The Sharkstream Book Club is started out kind of as a joke, where it's just like I would play games and it's like, oh, this game has a lot of text in it. Whoa, haha, Sharkstream Book Club. And then like I started thinking about it, just like, what if I just did that? What if I just did that as like a real thing, you know? And then I did do that as a real thing. Like, and it was fun. It was good. I enjoyed it quite a bit, actually. The first Sharkstream Book Club was, of course, oh god, excuse me. Whew. I just finished eating, so my mouth's a little gunky. I might need to get some water before we really get started. But the first Sharkstream Book Club was for the Darksiders novel, Darksiders the Abomination Vault. And it went really well. We finished the book in like 9 streams, I believe. And I had a lot of fun reading it. I know there were a lot of people who had a lot of fun like listening to me read it. And just overall, it was a good time. It was a good time. And I've been meaning to do another one. But just really never could find the time to do so, if I'm being honest. But now, here we are. And I just finished playing the Dead Space rail shooter. There isn't a railgun in that game. I mean, I guess there's the contact beam, but the contact beam's not really a railgun. It functions similarly to a railgun, but it is not itself a railgun. Excuse me. But you know, what better way to follow up all that talk of like events prior to Dead Space 1 than events prior to like the whole last Dead Space series. And that's why today we are going to be checking out Dead Space Martyr. This is the first novel released in the Dead Space multimedia franchise. It's one of 2. The other one, I think, Cataclysm or Catalyst. It's a cat word. It starts with cat, and there's a Y in it. I'm reasonably certain. That one doesn't really have anything to do with, like, the storyline, which I'm usually not opposed... Jesus. I'm usually not opposed to. This music's getting really intense for me just talking about stuff. I'm usually not opposed to a novel that's just like, oh, this is just another story within the universe that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the overall plot, doesn't necessarily move anything along, but, you know, would be interesting. But, to be honest, like, I mean, meh. I read up on it, and, like, the main crux of the plot doesn't start until, like, halfway through, and there's large swaths of the book, apparently, where it's just like, hey, all this stuff that just happened, none of it fucking matters. And it's just like, then there's, like, questionable depictions of mental illness, and I don't know. I just ain't about that life. You know what I'm saying? So instead, we're gonna go ahead and read the Dead Space novel that actually has to do with the overall story, and is actually prudent for us to discuss prior to Dead Space 2 specifically. Because Dead Space 2 is going to have a sort of abridged version of the events of this book within it, that it has a particular unitologist spin on it. So it's relevant to an extent. But Dead Space Martyr tells the story of Michael Altman, a holy, almost messianic figure within the Church of Unitology. The sort of like this big, overarching, I guess it's like this antagonistic force within the Dead Space universe. And it tells a story of how he was part of the team that discovered the first marker in human history, the black marker, or the prime marker. And everything that came about as a result of that, and then what we know as, or what the Unitologists claim was the assassination of Michael Altman and the cover-up by the government at the time, which I think would have been, there's like a whole, there's like this whole event within the Dead Space timeline. It's this big civil war that gets talked about mostly in Dead Space 3. It's the civil war between the sovereign colonies and EarthGov. This is about the time when, like, study into the markers really ramps up. It's when the red marker is created, and it's what causes the sort of whole race to get more resources that results in, like, the creation of the Planet Cracker ships, and then eventually the Ishimura ending up on Aegis 7, so on and so forth. So that civil war, that's not going to become particularly important to the overall plot until, like, Dead Space 3, although the fallout of that civil war is kind of important to everything, like, throughout the whole series. Like, it's part of the reason the entire series happens, is because of this race to find ways to collect more resources. It's what causes them to start really looking into markers and stuff like that. But that's, again, Dead Space 3. We're so far away from it. But like I said, the most important thing that happens in this book is this discussion of essentially the inciting moment that caused the creation of the Church of Unitology. Which is a big deal, because as we all know, Unitologists are all, like... They're all, like, murderers. Every single one of them. I've said it multiple times before. Every single Unitologist is like a Manchurian Candidate code word away from just going absolutely fucking ham on everybody in their vicinity so that they can all turn into shambling space zombies. Every single one of them. No such thing as a good Unitologist. Ever. In Dead Space. Professor, I have a question. What is your question, friend Audrey? Also, welcome to Sharkstream. Why do they want to be zombie? So that's a bit of a complicated answer. There is an answer for that, though, and part of it has to do with marker influence. So the thing about the markers, whether they are original markers like the black marker or man-made markers like the red marker in Dead Space 1 and Extraction, or what I just like to refer to as the golden marker in Dead Space 2, is they all send out these carrier waves. And the carrier waves have different effects on different people. The way that it's explained within the Dead Space canon is maybe not the best way for them to explain it, but I'm going to go ahead and use their terminology. For quote-unquote smart people, the way that it affects them is that it imprints blueprints. It inputs blueprints into their head so that they can create more markers that give off more dementia waves. I say dementia wave, it's just that give off more, like, marker influence. And for quote-unquote not smart people, all they hear is noise that makes them go crazy. Noise that makes them lose their absolute fucking minds and makes them basically desire to kill everything. And with Unitologists, they have this whole thing within their religion that, like, they want to bring about convergence, because when convergence happens, people will be reborn. They broadcast Matt Pack onto their brain. Gotcha. Exactly. People will be reborn. We will all become a collective consciousness. Both people who have died, people who live, so on and so forth. And they see, most of them see, the Necromorphs as sort of like what that is. Like, they see a Necromorph and just like, this is what Unitology is all about. It's all about rebirth and the dead coming back to life so that we can all become one in this great unity, blah, 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 so on, so fucking forth. And then they just kill everybody. That's all it is. But this is all at the behest of intelligences vast and unknowable, whose motives are completely beyond human understanding. All we know is they need a lot of people to die all at once. Because they need the bodies. They need the flesh. But that's stuff that we'll take a look at in Dead Space 2 and 3. When we get to what are called the quote-unquote Brethren Moons. But for now, that's all. I wouldn't say that at the point of Dead Space Martyr, that's a twinkle in the eye of, whoever is writing this series. But basically, all you need to know is that anything that a marker tells someone or influences someone to do, whether they are influencing them to build more markers or seemingly influencing them to stop a marker from doing what it's doing, it's all just... Basically, it's basically all just stuff to proliferate the creation of markers. All of it. Proliferate the creation of markers, and then just, like, kill a lot of people a bunch. Kill many people a lot. Anyways, we should get started reading. Where did I put the book? Here it is. So this is Dead Space Martyr. The creature had charged, and he dived out of the way. It slammed into the side of the circular chamber with a loud crunch, the wall panel buckling. He pulled himself up, aching all over, and limped to the other side of the chamber. It was twice the size of a man. It moved forward by swinging from its spiky chitinous? You know, like bug armor. Exoskeletons. I'm gonna go with chitinous. Chitinous arms to its feet and back again. With incredible speed, he watched as it turned around, oriented itself, and then charged again, the floor shaking. He waited until the last possible second and then leapt again, his arm torn open this time by one of its spikes. The creature bellowed in rage or frustration, turning all about, trying to locate him. By the time it finally did, he was on the opposite side of the chamber, as far away from it as he could get. Okay, he thought, gripping his injured arm. Now it's my turn. It charged again. This time, instead of throwing himself sideways, he dived between its arms, sliding under it and up against its soft abdomen. He pulled his knife out and slid across its dead flesh, tearing it open as much as he could, then scrambled up and away, stumbling across the room. Before he got far, it caught him by the foot and swung him like a doll and let go. He smashed to the wall, hard. He tried to get up, but he couldn't move. He had felt the air rush out of him when he hit the wall, but it was more than that. Perhaps his back was broken. He expected the creature to charge again, but it didn't. Instead, it approached him leisurely, almost curiously. He watched it approach, and his fears began to build. The grotesque creature loomed over him. It struck him once, brutally, knocking him back against the wall. For a moment, he thought he might pass out, but suddenly the room took an intensity and crispness that it hadn't before. The creature lifted him up in the air, gave again its bellowing call. It shook him violently before bringing his head into his maw. A moment later, it tore his body in half. A moment after that, he was dead. Music is just a tad loud? Okay. One second. We're figuring this out in the prologue. That's good. That's fine. Let's just turn down the desktop audio itself also. How's that? Is that any better? We haven't gotten to the book proper, so this is a good time. Thankfully, they put this prologue here. I love Sharkstream Boom Club. Did I say... Hold on. Did I misspell anything? You got me nervous now. You can't be doing that. Did I misspell book club in the tweet? Fuck, I did. God damn it. Shit. Alright. Okay. We're not going to worry about it. I already sent it. I sent it in a hurry because I started the stream before I had a tweet written. Don't even worry about it. So we're not going to do a recap on the fucking prologue of the book, but it sounds like banger tweet oof me. Okay. I have made fun of your misspelling now. We're even. But it sounds like this unnamed protagonist who gets his fucking shit wrecked was up against a brute, which I believe is what that kind of necromorph called. They're these big Donkey Kong looking motherfuckers that have weak points, I believe, on the backs of their legs, the middle of their back, and then where their arms meet the main body. Ooh, banana. All right, part 1. Chapter 1. Chava woke up earlier than usual that day, just before the sun rose. His mother and sister were still asleep. His father was gone, traveling again. When the boy asked him where he went, he was always evasive, and Chava had learned not to ask further. He took a ladleful of water from the bucket and drank it, careful not to wake his sister. He poured another into the basin and washed his face and hands and arms before quietly slopping the rest onto the dirt floor. As a gamer, would you suggest Dead Space on Xbox or PC if you've played on both? I have only played... Well, have I played on more than one? Xbox, you get an F... If you've got a one of the series, the new generation series Xboxes, it does get an FPS boost. So, there's that. It's pretty nice, actually, the FPS boost it gets. I think it results in some funny glitches. Like, there's a part in Dead Space 2 where you fall through a ceiling and then land, like, superhero landing on the floor. And what ends up happening is he clips through the floor a bit, and then he rises up once you have control again. There's also some weird stuff with the DLC in Dead Space 2 that I took a couple of videos of, and I meant to post those on Twitter, but I just haven't yet. I'm going to make a gross noise real quick. 1 second. Okay. My nose was all stuffy. I had to make a gross noise. He was still sleepy. He watched his sister move restlessly, giving a little moan. Why had he woken up so early? He had been in the middle of a frightening dream. There was something chasing him, a strange, stumbling creature. Something that moved in lurches and starts, something that seemed at once alive and dead. He shook his head, wondering how something could be both alive and dead. That would be ridiculous! He slipped into his clothes and left the shack, careful to stop the piece of aluminum that served as a makeshift door from clacking behind him. Outside, he could smell the salt in the air, could see, a few hundred meters away, the slate-gray waves. The tide was out. The waves gentle now. Hard to hear from this distance. Something lingered in his head. A noise, a strange sound, a whispering. It was saying words, but in a language he couldn't understand. So softly that he couldn't even tell where one word stopped and another started. He tried to force the sound out, but though it receded, it didn't go away. It just hid itself somewhere deep in the back of his skull, nagging at him. His dream rushed forward to fill the space. The creature had been large, just a little bigger than a man. He was watching it from behind. In the dream, at first, he had thought it was a man, but when it turned, he saw that it was missing part of its face, the jaw. There was something wrong with its arms as well, but the dream was blurry, and he couldn't make out what it was exactly. It watched him with eyes as blank and inhuman as the eyes of a fish. And then, in a single bound, hissing, it had been on him, its slavering half-jaw trying to sink broken teeth into his throat. He was wandering, not really aware of where he was going, trying to fight off the bits of dream playing in his semi-conscious mind. He was surprised to find himself down at the shoreline. To the left, the coast was empty. Down the coast to his right, far in the distance, were 2 or 3 fishermen standing in the surf trying to pull something in. Whatever it was, the boy knew, would almost certainly be deformed in taste of oil. It would be a challenge to choke down. It was no longer safe to fish. The sea here was polluted and starting to die. Similar problems were working their way inland as well. He'd heard his father talking angrily about it. Crops that even a few years back had been healthy and strong now came up stunted if they came up at all. The only supposedly safe food was the patented foods grown in controlled environments by megacorporations, food that few could afford. So the choice, his father said, was either to eat food that slowly killed you or go broke on food you couldn't afford while everyone went on destroying the world. He started walking toward the fisherman, but something hindered his steps, slowly turning him. He began moving down the beach in the other direction, where it was deserted. Or almost deserted. There was something there, something rolling in the surf. A fish, maybe, he thought at first. But as he walked forward, it seemed too large to be a fish, and the shape was wrong. A corpse, maybe? A drowned man? But when it flopped back and forth in the tide, he knew he was wrong. That it was wrong. The hair started to stand on the back of Chava's neck. He walked towards the thing. trying not to listen to the rising cacophony of whispers taking over his head. Yep, hold on. I don't know how long we've been going for. It was like... Yeah, it was like 10 minutes. Alright. We're going to go ahead and pause this real quick. Because that is the end of Chapter 1. This book has pretty short chapters. And I don't want to overburden myself with information that I won't be able to remember when we do our recaps. So we're still going to go with like a quick recap at the end of every chapter. So with the layout, I like to imagine you're either playing while looking at the book or have the book memorized by heart, and I'm not sure which is funnier. I think memorizing the book is funnier, honestly. But let's go to the recap space. Hello, and welcome to the new Sharkstream Book Club recap space. This chalkboard background was graciously provided by my lovely wife, Natalie. And I am standing in front of the chat readout. So, one second, let's just... There we go. Okay, so... Chapter 1. Let's talk about Chapter 1. Let me just get ready here to talk about Chapter 1. Okay. So in Chapter 1, we only really have one character, Chava. Chava is a little lad. Living on the... I believe he's living on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. So let's go. Location, Yucatan Peninsula. Now, the reason that the fact that he's living on the Yucatan Peninsula and what else is located in the Yucatan Peninsula is going to be very important as we go forward, especially with regards to human, quote unquote, I guess, human history. With regards to the Yucatan Peninsula. But Chava has a dream. Less of a dream, more of a dream. Okay, it's a nightmare. And Chava's nightmare, it sounds like, based on the way he described it, he saw a necromorph. Now, based on Chava's description... the necromorph in his dream sounds like it might be a slasher necromorph. I remember thinking that, like, oh, it sounds like perhaps Chava, the prologue that we read is actually the dream that Chava is having. But it doesn't sound like the necromorph present in the prologue, which sounds more like a brute. It doesn't sound like the one that Chava's talking about in his nightmare. The nightmare necromorph sounds more like a slasher. Now, as Chava wakes up and starts going about his day, he mentions hearing whispers. Well, he's hearing words like at the back of his head, and they're not particularly clear. So these whispers that he's hearing are very much indicative of marker influence. But at the time that this story takes place, humans hadn't discovered the marker yet. So how could he be having marker influence? Again, this is going to come back to the fact that this particular part of the story takes place in the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, something that Chava talks about is basically how the Earth is slowly dying. I believe this particular point in time... slowly dying. Yeah, you know what? We're going to leave it. I believe at this particular point in time of the storyline, I'm not 100% certain on this because it's been a hot minute since I've read the book, but I think at this point, humanity, I'm pretty sure, hasn't mastered space travel just yet. I think that's still on the horizon. They haven't mastered like the shock point drive or anything like that. Which means that we probably don't have there isn't yet any sort of conflict between the sovereign colonies and EarthGov, which are the primary members in the conflict depicted in the Civil War at the start of Dead Space 3. So, right now, there's not too much anyone can do about it within the context of the story. Like, the oceans are already fucked. And it's starting to move inland. Crops can't be harvested or cultivated outside of like mega corporations making like, I assume, like superfoods that they then probably charge like out the ass for. And this is all consistent with everything that led up to the sort of like interstellar gold rush that we have in sort of like the backstory of Dead Space 2, of the Dead Space series, where it's just like everyone is now heading out into space to colonize new worlds that aren't fucking dying, and also eventually they're going to start harvesting materials and resources from those worlds to help out Earth, which isn't going to be doing so hot in a little bit. Now, while Chava is walking along the beach, he notices something in the waves. And perhaps it is, he mentions that it looks wrong and it is wrong. Because that thing in the waves is a necromorph. And it's a specific kind of necromorph that... How close is this book to the third game's opening? This book is about 100 years prior to the opening of the third game. I want to say this is like 300 years... So, okay, let me... Because I want to say that the way that it kind of shakes out is that the events of Martyr take place 300 years prior to the start of Dead Space 1. And the events of the prologue to Dead Space 3 take place about 200 years prior to the start of the series. So, Martyr happens, they spend 100 years studying and replicating the marker. Then that all goes to shit, and they abandon all those projects, and those things all sort of like sit around for 200 years until the red marker is discovered on Aegis 7. Is basically how that goes. And that's about where that chapter ends. So let's go ahead and just wipe all this down. Whoop! And let's get back to the book. Shoo! All right. Chapter 2. Michael Altman rubbed his eyes and looked away from his holoscreen. He was a tall man in his early 40s with dark hair going just a little gray at the temples and lively blue-green eyes. Normally, he had a keenly intelligent gaze, but today his face was a little drawn, a little weary. He hadn't slept well the night before. He'd had bad dreams. Visceral stuff. You know, like the video game company. All death, blood, and gore. Nothing he wanted to remember. That's odd, said James Field, the geophysicist whose lab he shared. Field ran stubby fingers through his thinning white hair and leaned back, his chair creaking beneath him as he stared across the room at Altman. Altman, did you get these same readings? What readings? Altman asked. Field spun a copy of his holoscreen Altman's way. It showed a Bugger. I'm noticing a trend of humans building shit then leaving for a century. Yeah, so, okay, pausing real quick in the middle of this chapter here. There's an interesting sort of like environmental element that is present primarily in Dead Space 3. Where, like, Isaac, Carver, and the crew all arrive at, like, Tau Volantis and the ship graveyard above. And, like, all of the technology in that whole sort of like flotilla and all the technology in the base on the ground is all more or less exactly the same as everything they have 200 years later. And this is kind of another element of that whole thing with like the Earth dying and everything, is that humanity has stagnated. There has, based on the environmental details in Dead Space 3, been no major innovation technology-wise for at least 200 years. It is an interesting sort of environmental detail that I actually really like about Dead Space 3 that a lesser man would call a plot hole. But me, I say, no, humanity's just kind of fucked at the time. Things aren't going well. Things are kind of on the downswing. Alright, so where was I? Oh, God, hold on. I need to make another gross noise. Okay. Field spun a copy of his holoscreen Altman's way. It showed a Bugger salvo gravity map of the 110-mile diameter of the Chicxulub crater. The crater had been left when the 10-kilometer bolide had struck the Earth 65 million years ago. James Field, now in his late 50s, had spent most of his career micromapping the crater for the state-owned Central American Sector Resource Corporation, or CASRC. C-A-S-R-C. CASRC. Or I'm going to go with CASRC. I just figured it was the marker influencing them not to progress. The only thing that I would say with regards to that is that they didn't really run into a lot of marker influence over the course of those 200 years because everything was pretty much everything was off-world. I don't recall exactly what happens to the black marker by the end of this book, but there really wasn't any major marker influence in that 200-year span. So it's just, I like to, like, if it is marker influence, like, that's fine. I think it's a stronger environmental detail if it's just humanity has just naturally not made any innovations at least 200 years. Like, I think that's stronger in terms of just, like, an environmental detail, if it's not something that's, like, influenced by alien minds. Oh, my back is killing me. All right. James Field, now in his late... Okay, CASRC, right. He focused mainly inland along the perimeter of the trough, where small concentrations of key minerals might be found and quickly extracted. Since people had already been doing the same for hundreds of years, this mainly meant going back for quantities small enough that earlier teams, before the resource crisis, had deemed them unworthy of retrieval. It was slow, tedious work, as close to being an accountant as you could get and still be a geophysicist. That Field actually seemed to enjoy this job told Altman more than he wanted to know about him. Altman, on the other hand, had been in Chicxulub only a year. His girlfriend, Ada Chavez, an anthropologist, had gotten funding to study the contemporary role of Yucatec Mayan folktales and myths. He'd managed to pull just enough strings and call in enough favors to get a small grant so he could follow her to Mexico. He was supposed to be profiling the underwater portion of the crater, providing a map of likely geological structures beneath the half-mile or so of sea muck by gathering data from both satellite imaging and underwater probes. It was, in theory, a strictly scientific project. But he knew that whatever information he gathered, the university would sell to an extraction company. He tried not to think about that. The work was slow and not very rewarding, but he tried to tell himself it wasn't quite as pointless as what Field was doing. He looked at Field's holoscreen carefully. It looked normal to him. Gravity readings typical. "What am I looking for?" said Altman. Field furrowed his brow. "I forget you're new," he said. "I'll zoom in on the center." The center of the crater was in deep water, about a half dozen miles from their laboratory. Altman leaned toward the monitor, squinted. A darkness at the heart of the crater revealed a gravitational anomaly. "Here's what it looked like a month ago," said Field. "See?" He flashed up another profile. In this one, the darkness in the center wasn't there, Altman saw. He checked the first profile. The readings everywhere but the center were the same. "How's that possible?" he asked. "It doesn't make sense, does it?" said Field. "It wouldn't just change like that." "Probably just an equipment malfunction," said Altman. "I've been working here a long time," said Field. "I know an equipment failure when I see one. This isn't one. The anomaly appears both on the satellite images and the underwater scans, so it can't be." "But how could it change?" asked Altman. "Maybe a volcanic eruption." Field shook his head. "That wouldn't give this sort of anomaly. Plus, the other instruments would have sensed it. I can't explain it. There's something wrong," he said, already reaching for his phone. Okay. So, hold on. Let me remind myself of a couple things here. I don't think... Did it say what Michael Altman is? Is he also a geophysicist? I'm trying to remind... I'm like reading back. I don't think it says. Alright, well, we'll figure it out as we go along, I get. Hold on, let me pause this. Bliskidoo, can't you? Alright. So, let's go ahead and talk about what we learned in this second chapter. Again, the chapters in this book are very short. It makes for a very easy read, thankfully, but we're going to be coming back here pretty often over the course of streams. So, we've met a couple people. We've met our main dude, Michael Altman. So Michael Altman is, from the sound of things, probably also a geophysicist, much like his partner here, but I'm sure we'll get more details on exactly what it is that he does as we continue. But he is here studying the interior of the Chicxulub crater. Now, the Chicxulub crater is one of the reasons that I mentioned that it's actually kind of important that we're talking about the Yucatan Peninsula here, and that we know exactly what it is that we're looking at. And I'll circle back to that in a moment. Michael Altman shares a lab here with his partner, James Field. So, James Field. So James Field is a geophysicist who is studying the outer rim of the crater, and they are both there essentially for corporate reasons. They work for CASERC, which is, let me remind myself here, Central American Sector Resource Corporation. Central American Sector Okay. Research Corporation. This is saying that my encoding is overloaded, but I'm not dropping any frames. As far as I can tell. Oh, hold on, I gotta... 1 second. Whoop. There we go. Now, James seems to be fully aware of what it is that he's doing here. He is tracking down very, very minimal pockets of just, like, important resources in and around this crater. Things that were missed on previous expeditions to basically just scrape the bottom of the barrel to get shit that people need to live. God, this music's really intense for me just talking about this shit. And Guy seems to enjoy what he does. So, I mean, good for him. Sounds kind of like a boring dude, though, if I'm being honest. But Altman is there in a similar capacity. He is studying the interior of the crater, and he kind of lies to himself that it's a purely scientific pursuit, but deep down, he knows that this is all being sold to a corporation to basically bleed the crater dry of resources anyway. So he just kind of tries not to tell himself, or not to think about it too much. He is dating Ada Chavez. Oh no, my FPS just drop completely every time I type something new in. That's probably fine, right? It's not like staying down. So I guess I've got that going for me, which is nice. Now, Ada Chavez is an anthropologist. I may need to... Is there anything? I don't think there's anything I can really do to, like, not have this happen. Oh, well. I'll deal with it. So Ada Chavez is an anthropologist, and she is studying basically, like, myths and folk tales from the local culture. So I think it was, like... So that's what she's here for. Altman wasn't originally going to be able to come down here, but he managed to pull some strings to get himself basically a transfer so that he could be with her. For some reason, very few people actually, like, married in the Dead Space universe. People have, like, girlfriends and boyfriends and everything, but, like, nobody's, like, bothering to get married from the sound of things. Do unitologists even have, like, marriage rituals? Okay, well, hold on. To be fair, there is at least one person in the Dead Space canon who was married, and that was John Carver. But that didn't exactly end well for him, to be fair. Alright, now Field has discovered an anomaly in the middle of the crater. And basically what it is that there is some sort of strange gravity fluctuation that a couple days ago straight up wasn't there. Just was not there. And now it is. So he's just like, hey, Altman, check this shit out. And Altman's just like, This doesn't seem like anything we really need to be worried about. Why are you showing me this? And he's just like, no, check this out. And then he shows him like the two different pictures, and he's just like, huh. Well, okay. And they're just like, oh, what could it be? We're going to have to find out. And then that's when the chapter ends, basically. Now, something that we need to kind of, a little bit of a history lesson for you. Let me go ahead and just put this down here. So the Chicxulub crater is the crater that was created by the meteorite that killed the dinosaurs. Do you perhaps see where this is going already? There is something weird in the dinosaur murder hole, and we're reading a Dead Space book. Do you maybe see what's happening here? Anyway, let's go ahead and move on to the next chapter. Whoop. All right. Go ahead and start this back up. This doesn't kill the fucking encoding. It's just me typing things in real time on screen. Which is weird. That's a weird thing specifically to kill the encoding. Anyway, chapter 3. As he got closer, Chava became more and more nervous. It wasn't a fish or anything like it. It wasn't a sea turtle or a dog or a jaguar. He thought maybe it was a monkey, but it was too big to be a monkey. He crossed himself and then crossed two fingers for protection, but kept moving forward. Even before he could see it clearly, he could hear it breathing. It's making a strange huffing noise, like someone trying to retch up something he was choking on. A wave pounded in, and for a moment the huffing stopped. The creature swallowed up by the water and foam, and the water ebbed and it left it panting on the damp sand. It flopped over and swiveled something like a head in its direction. It was like the creature in its dream, but much worse. It was not human, but it seemed as though it had once been human. Its neck looked like it had been flayed free of skin, the reddish pith underneath flecked with white splotches, oozing slowly. What looked to be eyes were only empty sockets covered with veined, opaque membranes. The jawbone seemed to have vanished entirely, leaving only a flap of loose skin and a hole where the mouth should have been. The huffing noise came from that opening, along with a bitter, acrid smell that made Chava cough. The creature was hunched over, its fingers webbed, a thin, leathery membrane running between its elbow and a hip like a bat's wing. It tried to stand, then fell back again into the damp sand. There were two large red lumps, bigger than its fist, on its back. They were growing. Mother of God, thought Chava. The creature gave a sound like a groan, the lumps on its back pulsing. The bones in its arms cracked, and the arms themselves twisting, becoming less human, coughed up a milky liquid that hung in strands from the hole in its face. The back split open with a loud cracking sound, spraying blood and exploding spongy gray sacs that filled and deflated. Chava was unable to move. The creature suddenly swiveled its head, staring at him with its eyeless face. Its muscles tightened, and the gaping hole pulled back into a poor imitation of a smile. Chava turned on his heel and began to run. Wow, that was 2 whole pages for chapter 3. Okay. And we're going back to the recap space. The recap space, what kills my encoding for some reason. At least it doesn't stay that way. At least it manages to recover. But like God, wish it would chill maybe just a little bit. So we have confirmed that this thing on the beach is in fact a necromorph. It is actually a specific kind of necromorph that has been in the games. I will say that this particular kind of necromorph has only shown up in Dead Space 1. And in, like, I think just one level. I think it only shows up in hydroponics. I'm trying to find, like, a list of all the different kinds of necromorphs. I would like a list of all the different kinds of necromorphs. Okay. Lurkers, Guardians. Brute Tripod Grave Robber. Hi, my next moon. I'm trying to find out where this fucking... what this fucking thing is. How does the Dead Space wiki not have, like, a list of known necromorph types on the page for necromorphs? This is fucking nonsense. Alright, let's see here. Let's see. Can I get something? Anything, perhaps. Evidently not. Okay, hold on. Maybe there is... Okay. Category necromorphs. Here we go. Infector, Hive Mind, Aliens, Brute, Commander, Corruption, Crawler, Creeper and Shambler, Cyst, Divider, Exploder, Feeder, Flyer, Flytrap, Fodder, Grabber, Grave Rotter, Guardian, Hive Mind, Hunter, Infection, Infector, Leaper, Leviathan, Lurker, Medusa, Nest, the Pack, Pink Camo Viral Suit? Hold on. What the hell is that? I'll open that in a new tab to take a look at that later. Pause, Pregnant, Puker, Regenerator, Slasher, the Slug, the Spider. Spitter, Splitface, Stalker, Swarm, Swarmer, Swinger, Tentacle, the Boss, the Bully, the Creeper, the Hunters, Tavalantis Moon, the Nexus, the Snow Beast, the Tormentor, the Ubermorph, Tripod's Nest, Twitcher, the Urchin. Weeza! That's an ad. So the specific kind of necromorph that Chava finds on the beach is what is known as a Weezer. Now, what a Weezer is like I said, they show up. I don't think it's only once in Dead Space 1. They may show up in another level as well. But their primary, the one that I remember them from more than anything, is hydroponics in Dead Space 1. You go there, and you go inside, and ooh, stinky smelly. Awful. Horrible smell. And you're just like, fuck, we need to stop this horrible smell, or else it's going to kill all of the plants in here, and then we don't have any fucking oxygen. Because, hey, when you're on a ship, like in space, you maybe need oxygen. You maybe need plants to produce oxygen. And if the plants die, well, you're fucked. You ever seen Sunshine? Yeah. It'll be like that. If you haven't seen Sunshine, go see Sunshine. It's a pretty good movie. The entire thing with Weezers, though, is that they are basically entirely immobile. You need to, in the game, track them down and kill them in order to stop them from being stinky. So, the way that they look is that they're constantly in a kneeling position. Their forearms have fused to their thighs in this position, and their back has split open, and they have these huge lungs that just inflate as they breathe in, then deflate as they breathe out poison gas. And they make this horrible noise. Awful. Just the worst. Terrible sound that they make. But I mean, like, it's the reason they're called Weezers, you know, because they're wheezing is the thing. Now, unlike most other enemies in Dead Space, any of them, the Weezer isn't exactly one that you really need to worry about cutting the limbs off of. In fact, I don't think it has, like, cut off limb states like the others do. You basically just need to wail on it until it dies. And then when it does die, then you've purified the air in the area. And you can move on to the next one. But yeah, that's kind of the long and short of it. We're going to be seeing how Chava and his community handle this wheezy boy in just a bit here. But in the meantime, let's check back with Michael Altman in the next chapter. Chapter 4. A few minutes later, Field had spoken to Ramirez and Showalter, two other geophysical scientists working in the area. They had confirmed it. They were getting... Oh, hold on, I didn't start the game up. They were getting the same readings as Field. It wasn't an equipment problem. Something had changed at the heart of the crater itself. My money on they handled it very poorly. Perhaps. You'll have to stay tuned and find out. But why? Asked Altman. Field shook his head. Who knows? He said. Showalter thought it might have to do with seismic activity focused directly at one of the sensors. But even as he suggested this, was already talking himself out of it. Ramirez is as confused as we are. He's talked to a few others, none of whom seem to know what's going on. Something's shifted, something's different, but nobody knows why it's changed or even what it could be. Nobody has ever seen anything quite like it. Well, what should we do? Asked Altman. Field struggled, thought for a moment. I don't know, he said slowly. He sat running his fingers through his thinning hair, staring at nothing. Nothing much we can do on our own, he finally said. I'll file a report with Kasserk and see what they advise. Until I hear back, I suppose I'll just keep on with the readings. With a sigh, Field turned back to his screen. Altman just stared at him, disgusted. What's wrong with you? He asked. Are you even curious? What? Said Field, turning back. Of course I am, but I don't know what to do about it. We tried to figure it out, and everybody else is just as confused as we are. And that's it. You're just going to give up. Not at all, said Field, his voice rising. I told you, I'm filing a report with Kasserk. They'll be sure to have some ideas. That seems the best way to handle it. And then what? You wait a few weeks for someone to read the report and then a few more weeks for a response? What goes on in the meantime? You just keep taking readings? What are you, a company man? Field's face flushed dark. There's nothing wrong with following protocol, he said. I'm just doing my job. This could be huge, said Altman. You said yourself it's not like anything you've seen before. We've got to try to figure it out. Field pointed one shaky finger. Finger? He pointed one shaky finger at him. You do what you want, he said in a low, quavering voice. Go ahead and be a maverick and see where it gets you. This is a big deal and it needs to be handled properly. I'll do my job the way I know it should be done. Altman turned away, his lips a tight line. I'm going to find out what's going on, he vowed, even if it kills me. Hours later, Altman still hadn't got any further than Field. He called every scientist he knew in and around Chicxulub, anybody with an interest in the crater. Each time he hit a wall, he'd ask the person on the other end who else they thought he should call, and then called them. By 4:45, he still hadn't gotten anywhere and had run out of names. He ran back over the data and correlated with what he could get his colleagues to send him. Yes, there definitely was a gravitational anomaly. Something had shifted with the electromagnetic field as well, but that was all he knew. Field, who like any good bureaucrat quit promptly at 5 every day, had begun to transmit his data to pack up. "You're leaving?" asked Altman. Field smiled and heaved his pear-shaped bulk out of the chair. "Nothing left to do here today," he said. "I'm not paid overtime," he explained, and then walked out the door. I mean, that seems reasonable. I wouldn't want to work any later than I have to. Like, that's just... who does that? Altman stayed on another few hours, going over the data and maps again, searching for precedents for shifts like this and records about the crater itself or about similar sites. Records that stretched all the way back to the 20th century. Nothing. He was just on his way out the door himself when his phone sounded. "Dr. Altman, please," said a voice. It was barely louder than a whisper. "This is Altman," he said. "Word has it you've been asking around about the crater," said the voice. "That's correct," he said. "There's this odd anomaly—" "Not over the phone," the voice whispered. "You've already said too much as it is. 8 o'clock, the bar near the quay. You know where that is?" "Of course I know," said Altman. "Who is this?" But the caller had already hung up. Okay. Yep. There we go. Nobody knows what the fuck is happening. Nobody has any idea. Nobody wants to figure it out. This angers the Altman. This makes him so mad. He's so angry. And he's just like, ugh, whatever, losers. I'm gonna work overtime for no pay to figure this out. It's just like, wow, Altman, you are truly the smartest person I've ever seen. Like, kids, don't work for free. Don't do it. Be like James Field. Quit at 5. Who gives a fuck? Imagine, none of the Dead Space series would have happened if Altman had just quit at 5 like a good employee. If Altman hadn't been such a fucking bootlicker and just quit at 5 o'clock, then hey, maybe we wouldn't even be here. So yeah, nobody knows what the fuck is going on with these readings. Field doesn't really care. He's just like, you know what? I'm not paid enough to look into weird shit. I'm going to send off a report to Kasserk, and they can worry about it in the morning. But Altman doesn't like this. This makes Altman angry. Because Altman is a curious boy. He is a curious 40-year-old boy. And he wants to know what the fuck is going on in that crater. So he starts calling people, and he asks those people he should call, and then he calls those other people. But eventually he hits a dead end. And then, suddenly, and without warning, Altman gets a mysterious phone call. And the person on the other end of this mysterious phone call is like, "Hello, I am Mysterious Phone Call Man. And you need to stop asking about what the fuck's going on in the crater. And you should talk to me, in secret, instead. Meet me at this bar, and we'll get a drink. We'll chat things out. Maybe kiss a little. And Altman's just like, okay, I enjoy kissing a little. I kiss my girlfriend a little all the time. And then the guy hangs up. So we've got a big mystery on our hands, folks. We've got big mysteries afoot at the Chicxulub Quato. And these mysteries are going to have such a fucking cascading effect across the entire universe. And it's gonna be bad for everyone involved, basically. Like, no one's gonna get out of this in a good headspace, quite frankly. But for Altman, at least, he is determined to get some answers. And this mysterious phone call man may have the answers he's looking for. Those answers just might doom humanity is the only thing. But it'll probably be fine. But how's Chava doing, I wonder? Maybe we should find out what Chava's up to. With the Weezer morph. Shall we? Shall we go find out what Chava's up to? Let's go find out what Chava's up to. Together. Like we used to. Like a family. By the time Chava came back, dragging along his mother and a few other people from the nearby shantytown, the creature had changed again. The wet gray sacks on its back were larger now, each almost the size of a man when fully inflated. Its arms and legs had somehow joined, melding into one another. The flayed quality of the neck had changed, the flesh now looking as if it were swarming with ants. The air around it had taken an acrid yellow sheen. It hung a heavy cloud, and when they got too close, they found it difficult to breathe. One man, a small but dignified-looking old drunk, wandered into the cloud and, after staggering about coughing, collapsed. Two other villagers dragged him out by the feet and then began to slap him. I like the obviously they're trying to slap him to wake him up. But, I'm imagining they just start wailing on him for seemingly no reason. They're just like, hey, buddy, whack. Hey, buddy, whack. And it's just like, are y'all trying to wake him up? It's just like, wake who up? And they just keep slapping him. They're not even slapping him in the face anymore. They're just smacking him all over the body. Chava watched until the drunk was conscious again and groping for his bottle, then turned back to stare at the creature. What is it? Chava asked his mother. His mother consulted in whispers with her neighbors, watching the thing. It was hard for Chava to hear everything they were saying, but he heard one word over and over again. Ishtab. Ishtab. Finally, his mother turned to him. Who is Ishtab? Chava asked nervously. Go fetch the old Bruja, she told him. She'll know what to do. The old Bruja was already heading towards the beach when he came across her. She was moving slowly, leaning on a staff. She was old and frail, most of her hair gone and her face a mass of wrinkles. His mother claimed that she had been alive when the Spaniards killed the Mayans 1,000 years before. She is like a lost book, his mother had said another time. She knows everything that everyone else has forgotten. She carried a pouch slung over one shoulder. He started to explain about the creature, but she silenced him with a gesture. I already know, she said. I expected you sooner. He took her arm and helped her along. Others from the shantytown were coming down to the beach as well, some walking as if hypnotized. Some wept, some ran. Who is Ishtab? Asked Chava suddenly. Ah, Ishtab, said the Bruja. She stopped walking and turned to face him. She is a goddess. She is the rope woman. She hangs in the tree, a rope around her neck, and her eyes are closed in death. But her body has begun to rot. But she is still a goddess. But is she dead? The goddess of suicide, mused the Bruja. She is the hanged goddess, the goddess of the end, and she gathers to her those who are dead by uncertain means. She stared at the boy intently. She is a very harsh mistress, she said. Chava nodded. Tell me, the Bruja said to him, did you dream last night? Chava nodded. Tell me your dream, said the Bruja, and then listened carefully as he recounted it confusedly in bits and pieces. She gestured forward at the people running in front of them, as the crowd of people around the strange creature up ahead. These, too, she said. They have shared our dream. What does it mean? Asked Chava. What does it mean? She asked. She pointed a shaky finger at the creature ahead, its gray sacks now almost twice the size of the man, the cloud of noxious gas growing. Here you see what it means. We dreamed it, and we made it real? Asked Chava, amazed. She gave him a toothless smile and cackled. You think you are so powerful? She asked, and started shuffling forward again. You think we are so powerful? No, she said. We could not make these. Our dream is a warning. A warning? The dream tells us there is something wrong, she said. We must set it right. For a time, they walked through the sand without speaking, the old woman breathing heavily. Chava could already hear the hissing from the creature, louder than the crash of the surf. Have you begun to dream awake? The Bruja asked. What do you mean? He asked, frightened. Ah, yes, she said. I can hear in your voice that you have. You must be careful. It found you first. It found you first. It means to take you. Chicxulub. You know what this word means? The boy shook his head. And yet you had lived in this town all your life, she scolded him. You have lived within a word you do not know. He was silent for a moment, then asked, Is that bad? She made a noise with her lips, but did not answer. Apparently, it wasn't a question worth answering. What does Chicxulub mean? She stopped briefly, and with the tip of her stick drew a figure in the sand. It was 2 lines, twisting around each other. He crossed his fingers and imitated it by making the sign of protection he had learned as a child. She nodded. What is this? He asked. She didn't say anything. She spread her toothless mouth wide, which looked for a moment disconcertingly like the jawless maw of the creature on the beach. Tail of the devil, she said. The devil has started to wake and thrash its tail. We cannot coax it back to sleep, and this will be the end of us. Okay. Alright, so, first and foremost, a little bit of truth in fiction, as it were. So Chicxulub does in fact mean Tail of the Devil. It's... I believe it is basically like... Or it looks like it's either Tail of the Devil or the Devil's Flea. Now, this was a stroke of providence for the Dead Space team, of course, because it means that they could work this idea of the Devil's Tail into basically the design of the marker. This, like, these 2 lines intertwining, coming to a forked point. Now, it was already named that, of course. This isn't something like they made up for the book. Although, it makes for good fiction, for sure. That basically the Tail of the Devil is in and of itself the marker in question. It does bring to question, how do they know what it looks like? You know? Like, I don't know how long it took for the crater and like this whole area to be underwater, but I can't imagine that there were a lot of people around the time that like it would have been exposed to open air who would have been able to sort of like keep a written record. That being said, if, as the Bruja is explaining, this has been something that in the past has influenced people, it's possible that people have been shown the shape and form of the marker previously. Now, speaking of the Bruja, Bruja is a Spanish word, which I believe just basically means witch. And I only know this because of Batman Arkham Asylum. Because this is what Bane in Batman Arkham Asylum calls Dr. Young. He calls her the Bruja because she is the one who had him move to Arkham and has been draining his body and blood of venom over the course of like a year or something. That and Bad Boys 3. Haven't seen Bad Boys 3, personally. But I believe you. I defer to your judgment as someone who it sounds like has probably actually seen Bad Boys 3. But me personally, I know it from Batman. Now the Bruja is, she's chatting with Chava here, and she's asking him about his dreams. And he tells her about his dreams, and she mentions that everyone has been having the same dream. Oh, hold on. 1 second, actually. One moment. Okay, sorry about that. My mom called me out of nowhere. I say out of nowhere, but I feel like she pretty consistently calls me during Saturday streams every couple of weeks. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yeah. So, Bruja asks him, like, oh, hey, have you been dreaming? And he's just like, yeah, here's what my dream is. And she's just like, oh, yeah, literally everyone else has been having the same dream. Isn't that fucking weird as shit? And it's like, yeah, that is pretty weird as shit. Where have we heard of that sort of thing happening before? So, I gotta get the text thing up again. 1 second. So everybody is being influenced by something. Clearly, there is some sort of marker or possibly marker-like device. Something is sending out a signal that sounds a lot like marker madness from the games. Weird whispers, dreams. She mentions dreaming awake, which is basically just like, having hallucinations, having visions, which, as we know, is another prominent feature of marker madness. So something is happening. Something is causing all of this, and something is pretty clearly creating necromorphs, if this wheezy boy on the fucking sand is any indication. I need to, can I tighten this any further? My mic is, wiggling. Alright. So, there's some fucking nonsense going on. Now, he asks her about what Chicxulub means. She tells him Tale of the Devil. And then she draws two intertwining lines in the sand. So it's like a... Hold on. What would be... How could I do this? So something like just like... Something like that. My fucking leading's a little off, but just it's fine. Don't worry about it. And Chava crosses his fingers. It's pretty standard, just like finger crossing, which, according to him, is a sign of protection that he has been taught since his youth. Now, the process of making finger and hand signs in this sort of intertwining line shape is not anything we are particularly unaccustomed to within Dead Space lore. In Dead Space 2, it's shown that the sort of prayer position for unitology is this sort of like marker-like crossing of the arms and curving of like the wrists and the hands, that is shown on like posters and stuff like that. That seems to be sort of a similar kind of symbol to be made. But all the same, everything seems to be pointing towards, oh shit, there is a marker somewhere. And with everything that we're learning on Altman's side of the story right now, the implication seems to be that there is a connection between this Wheezy boy that washed up on the beach, these dreams, this tail of the devil symbol that has been drawn in the sand, and these weird gravity fluctuations in the center of the Chicxulub crater.
Have you put it together yet? Don't worry, we'll get there if you haven't.
So let's go ahead and check back with Altman and see about who's this weird guy he's meeting. Who's this mysterious phone call man? Oh, also she's just like, oh yeah, if we don't put the devil to sleep, it'll be the end of us. That's not ominous. Oh god, is this another one that's only like 2 pages? It's less than 2 pages. This is like a page and a half. Shit. Okay, well. All the same. There was no reason to go, Altman thought. It was silly, probably someone's idea of a joke. You ask enough questions and it was inevitable that someone would screw with you. The last thing he needed was to start thinking espionage and conspiracy. He needed to figure this out rationally and scientifically. So instead of going to the bar, he just went home. When he arrived, Ada was already there. She was sitting at the table, leaning back in the chair asleep, her long dark hair tucked behind her ears and cascading over her shoulders. Altman kissed her neck and woke her up. She smiled, and her dark eyes flashed. "You're later than normal, Michael," she said. "You haven't been cheating on me, have you?" She teased. "Hey, I'm not the one who's exhausted," he said. "I didn't sleep well last night," she said. "Had the worst dreams." "Me too," he said. He sat down and took a deep breath. "Something weird is going on," he said. He told her about what he and Field had discovered and the calls he had made. The general sense that he felt, and that others seemed to share, that something was off. "That's funny," said Ada, "and not in a good way. It was the same with me today." "You discovered a gravitational anomaly, did you?" "Kind of," she said, "or at least the anthropological equivalent. The stories are changing." "What stories?" "The folktales. They're starting to change, and quickly, too. That doesn't happen, Michael. It never happens." Altman was suddenly serious. "Never?" "Never." "Shit." "They keep speaking of the devil's tail," she said. "A kind of twisted, pronged thing. When they mention it, they cross their fingers. Like this." She raised her middle and index fingers, crossed them. "But when I try to get them to talk about it, they fall silent. They've never been like that with me before. It's like they don't trust me anymore." She brushed the top of the table with her hand. "You want to know what's strangest of all?" "What?" "Do you know what they say, Tale of the Devil? You know how they say Tale of the Devil in Yucatec Maya? Same name as the crater. Chicxulub." Altman felt his throat go dry. He looked back at the clock. 7:45. Still time to make it to the bar after all. Okay, so... Oh, hold on, let me pause the game real quick. I also want to get something to eat real quick, so just give me one moment. I'm gonna go get something to snack on. Just because, like, I'm wondering, I'm feeling a little weird, and I'm wondering if it's because I'm, like, drinking an energy drink without anything to eat it with. So give me one moment, 1 second. I prepared for this. All Alright, I'm coming back. 1 second. 1 second. Almost there. Okay. Alright, so... You know, sometimes a lot of people will tell you, hey, don't go grocery shopping when you're hungry. But, like, sometimes that can actually benefit you, especially if you're the type who, like, always ends up, like, lamenting the fact that you didn't buy any snacks last time you went to the grocery store. Going to the grocery store hungry can actually prompt you to, like, hey, buy some fucking snacks that you're going to want later in the week. So, I got, hold on. Fucking easy open my ass. Come on here. Come on. There we go. Ugh. I have had the strangest craving. Ooh. There we go. The strangest craving for, like, pepperoni recently? Or just, like, charcuterie stuff. So, I got some charcuterie meats. And then I also got roasted garlic bagel chips. Because, you know, why not, right? Okay, so part of the thing with, like, some of these, like, shorter chapters is that not all of them are probably going to give us, like, a reasonable amount of things, of, like, new developments. Like, there's going to be some interesting stuff, but we're not talking to, like, earth-shattering revelations every single fucking chapter, you know? Well... Now, that being said, so this chapter discussed kind of what we already talked about with regards to, like, Chicxulub means devil's tail, or tail of the devil. They describe the odd twisty shape that everybody's been drawing. And then we get a bit of a bombshell dropped by Ada. Because, again, Ada has been studying folklore of the sort of Yucatec Maya culture. And what we're getting... Oh! Paul Ben, thank you for the gift sub. Venom Lad, you enjoy that. So we hear that stories are changing. Which isn't necessarily, like, okay. Stories change over time, especially things like folklore and myth. It does happen. But usually these are very minor changes, just kind of over time. But according to what Ada is saying, stories are changing fast. So everyone in the area has started talking about, like, oh, the devil's tail, the devil's tail. They've started doing these, like, these crossed fingers and these intertwining lines. And Ada is mentioning that this is not anything that she has seen before in all her time studying, like, Yucatec Mayan folklore, which is kind of a big deal considering it's, like, her entire expertise. Like, this sort of thing just doesn't just happen. I need to, like... Hold on. I'm, like, trying to get myself a setup here that is going to make this food easy enough for me to consume. This sort of thing doesn't just happen like this. Stories are supposed to change, like, gradually over time through retellings and people playing the telephone game. They're not supposed to change all at once within a short span of time. Unless, of course, there is some sort of outside influence causing the stories to change. Imagine, if you will, a weird rock that sends out energy vibes that make you go nuts. I would think that among the many things that these vibes that make you go nuts would do, would probably make you misremember some of the folklore that you have been talking about your whole life. Probably to somehow insert this weird rock into said folklore in fun and interesting ways. Perhaps. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not an expert on weird rocks. For that, you would need a xenogeologist. Which roughly translates to weird rock liker. But yeah. Now, Altman had not been intending to take this mysterious phone man up on his offer, but after hearing about, like, this weird shit that Ada has been dealing with on her end of the science spectrum, he decides, you know what? Maybe I could go for a drink right now. Uh-huh. Which, like, better late than never, I guess. Okay. You know, I think I like the Italian dry salami and the peppered salami a little bit more than the caprese salami. Or calabrese, excuse me. Gotta say. I got my preferences. Kind of wish I had just gotten straight pepperoni, but I could not find any goddamn pepperoni. Like, who doesn't have pepperoni in this day and age? Okay. So, let's see what happens when Altman goes to meet this weird man. Wait, no. We gotta check back with Chava first. That's right. For a while, nobody spoke. They just stood there, watching the Bruja, who, in her turn, steadying herself on Chava's shoulder, just watched the creature. You see? She said in a whisper that was nearly drowned out by the creature's wheezing. It is growing bigger. She reached deep into her pouch and pulled out a handful of something. She began to dance, tracing a slow circle around the creature, just at the edge of the cloud the creature was creating for itself. She dragged Chava along with her, sprinkling something in the sand before her. It was a wandering dance, off-kilter, almost drunken. At first the others just watched, then slowly one or two began to follow, then a few more. Some shook their heads, as if breaking out of a trance. When she stood directly across from the creature's head, she stopped and began turning in place. Soon, everyone was doing this, watching the Bruja, falling into place, slowly forming a complete circle. They turned around the creature, some of them standing knee-deep in the surf. She swung her staff before her, stepped back, and stepped forward again. The others followed. Chava stepped too far and found himself coughing, having breathed some of the gas the creature was emitting. His eyes stung, his throat itched. The Bruja lifted her hands, her index and middle fingers crossed. Chicxulub, she murmured, and turned again. The word went up mangled from the mouths of the others, like a groan. The Bruja slowly turned and walked away, her back straighter than her stride firmer than on the walk over. She walked a few yards back from the circle and dug into the sand until she unearthed a piece of driftwood, then turned and rejoined the circle again. She nodded and gestured at Chava until he, too, left the circle and came back with driftwood. One by one, the others followed, wandering out of the circle and coming slowly back. The skin that formed the gray sacs on the creature's back had thinned and thinned as the sacs grew. Now it was almost transparent. The sacs slowly billowed up until they were taut and then deflated, going out halfway slack before swelling again. It was a terrible thing to watch. Chava kept expecting them to burst. The Bruja was dancing again. She lifted her chunk of driftwood high, gave a toothless smile, and threw it at the creature. It struck the creature softly in the face and fell to the sand just below it. The creature didn't react at all. "Now you," said the Bruja to Chava. "Higher and harder." He threw his piece of wood high and hard at the leftmost sack. It struck the sack near the bottom and tore it just slightly. Air began to hiss out. The Bruja raised her hands and brought them down, and the others threw their pieces of wood as well. One or two missed, one or two bounced off, but more than a few tore the sacks, some quite deeply. Air rushed out of them. The acrid clouds slowly began to disperse. "Now go," said the Bruja to Chava, her voice hoarse. "You see the nameless man there, stumbling drunk as usual. Run to him, and take his bottle and bring it back to me." He quickly ran around the circle to the small but dignified dark-haired drunk who had gotten too close to the cloud earlier and almost died. The man turned and smiled at him. Before he could react, Chava grabbed the bottle he'd posted between his feet and fled back to the Bruja. She took it from him and uncorked it. Behind them, the drunk man was protesting, some of the others holding him back. "Hold your breath," she said to Chava as she gave him the bottle. "You must pour this on the wood and on the creature itself." His heart pounding, Chava took a deep breath and rushed forward. The torn skin of the sacks had already begun to knit itself back together. The bags were still mostly deflated, but were beginning to rise. He upended the bottle, splashing the creature and the wood around it, and then rushed back to the Bruja, his eyes swollen and stinging. The Bruja lit the top of her staff on fire and carefully moved forward, touching it to the creature's head. But the creature in the driftwood caught fire immediately. She dropped her staff, letting it burn too. The creature hissed and thrashed, but never tried to escape from the flames. Gray sacks on its back turned to ash and blew away. Eventually it stopped moving altogether. The Bruja, swaying, led them once again in a slow, stuttering dance. Chava found his feet naturally following it, adapting to it, almost as if someone else were moving his legs. He wondered how many of the fellow villagers felt the same way. The village drunk he saw wasn't part of the circle. He stayed a little distance, swaying slightly, staring at the fire, his brow furrowed. They kept on, tracing slow, curving motions in the air, until all that was left of the creature was a charred, smoldering skeleton. Stripped of its flesh and burnt to a crisp, it looked almost human. So, the Weezer is dead, having been burned, which is not usually, the killing method of choice when it comes to necromorphs, but I mean, it gets the job done. We're not quite at the point of, cut off their limbs being thrown in your face, every 5 goddamn seconds. But, that being said, again, this is a Weezer. Probably the only enemy in the game, in, the first game at least, or at the very least, one of the only enemies, that you don't actually really worry about cutting the limbs off of. You just kind of wail on it until it dies. Now, it's obviously not the only enemy in the game that you can do that to. You can pretty much wail on most enemies until they die. It's just not particularly convenient to do so. 1 second. So, there's something to be said about the strange method by which they did take care of this necromorph. They were led by this woman, the Bruja, and everyone seemed to start just kind of moving in unison, but it didn't seem like everyone was putting a huge amount of effort into it. It just kind of sort of happened, and everyone was sort of pulled along. There seems to be some kind of just mass influence of people's cognition and movements during this whole process. Now, this sort of mass influence is actually pretty common for, like, marker stuff. And I have 2 messages on Discord. I should make sure those aren't anything particularly important. Okay. It is particularly important, actually. All right. Well, it's nothing that we have to, like, cut anything short for, at least not just yet. But this sort of thing is actually pretty common. A lot of time, like, most of the time whenever we see sort of, like, mass demonstrations influenced by the marker, it's usually mass suicides. Kind of like the mass suicide in Deacon Abbott's congregation, depicted in the comics and talked about in I believe, what is it? It's the opening level of Dead Space Extraction. I forget what the location they perform that particular mass suicide in is called, but yeah, it's talked about in Extraction. Lexine mentions it to her boyfriend in the opening level, and it is depicted in the comic series. Beyond that, like, that's... From there's a lot of sort of, like, mass influence of, like, necromorphs gathering in certain places, gathering up bodies, things like that. And we know that this seems to be some degree of influence because Chava himself mentions feeling like he's being puppeted. And the drunk doesn't seem to be affected at all. Like, he seems to be doing fine. I mean, he's still drunk, but he's, like, way off from the group. He's not interacting at all. Now, this, of course, begs the question, if this is some sort of marker influence, why are they attacking the Weezer? Like, that's kind of like the big thing here. And this may be indicative of that whole, like, motives that are so alien they're unknowable with regards to the influence of the markers, and on a greater scope, the influence of the Brethren Moons, as seen in Dead Space 3. And it also might have something to do with, like, the sort of inconsistency with the function of the markers between how it is sort of depicted in Dead Space 1, where the implication seemed to be that it was the hive mind that was creating and influencing the necromorphs, and the marker was stopping it from doing so. And then, like, future games are just like, no, the marker is the one that's sending out the signal. The marker is the one creating the necromorphs, so on and so forth. It's not super clear in those games exactly how everything works, and this might just honestly be another symptom of that, where it's like, here's this necromorph that obviously would have to have been created by the marker, and here's this group of people who seem to be under some sort of mass influence. Some kind of just everyone is dancing, everyone is moving in sync. They're kind of moving a little sloppily, but like they're not really moving themselves with any precision. They're being more influenced to do so. But then why are they working against this creation of the marker? That's the question. And as far as I'm aware, there really isn't like a particularly good answer for why they're doing that. It's just sort of like the motives and the methods of the markers, of the Brethren Moons, of this great eldritch alien intelligence are just kind of unknown to us. That may seem like a lazy cop-out, and maybe at times it is, but like, it's really the best that we've got right now, unfortunately. All right, let's just clear that out. And let's check back with Altman. He ordered a bottled beer and made sure it came... This is chapter 8. He ordered a bottled beer and made sure it came with the cap, still sealed. As he waited on his change, he scanned the bar, trying to determine who might have telephoned him. The small bar's only inhabitants were half a dozen scientists from the North American sector. It could have been any one of them. He sat down at a table. He just opened the beer and taken a sip when a man approached him. The man was pale-skinned and thin, wearing a jumpsuit, his hair cropped short. Altman guessed he must be a technician of some sort. "You're Altman," the man said. It wasn't a question. "That's right," said Altman. "And you are..." "I only give my name out to my friends," he said. "Are you a friend?" Altman stared at him. "All right," said the man. "Maybe you don't make friends right off the bat. Okay, whatever you think of what I tell you, if anybody asks, you didn't hear it from me." Altman hesitated only a moment. "All right," he said. "Shake on it," the man suggested. The man extended a hand. Altman took it and shook. "Hammond," the man said. "Charles Hammond." He pulled out the table's other chair and sat down. "Nice to meet you," said Altman. "Now, suppose you tell me what's going on." Hammond leaned in closer. "You've been noticing things," he said. "You're not the only one." "No," said Altman coolly. "I'm in communications. Freelance, mostly industrial installations." He reached out and poked Altman's chest lightly with a finger. "I've been noticing things, too." "Okay." "There's a pulse," Hammond said. "Slow and irregular, and very weak, but strong enough to fuzz up other signals just a little. I'm a perfectionist. When I set something up, I like it to be crystal clear. Things that don't bother other people bother me. That's why I noticed it." He stopped. Altman waited for him to go on. When he didn't, Altman took a sip of his beer and asked, "Noticed what?" Hammond nodded. "Exactly," he said. "At first I thought it was a problem with the communications terminal I was installing for Dredger Corp." "I didn't know Dredger Corp had a place here," interrupted Altman. That, as much as anything, was an indication to him that something odd was going on. Dredger Corp was one of the shadiest of the resource retrieval corporations, the sort of company willing to swoop quickly into an area under the radar of the local government, strip mine or bore and take as much as they could before it was noticed, then swoop quickly away again. "Officially, they don't. Just got here. Very hush-hush," said Hammond. "I'm not supposed to know who they are. Anyway, at first I thought it was a loose connection, something off just enough to give a minor electrical discharge, then gave the line an occasional slight hiss every so often. So I took the thing apart. Nothing wrong with it, so I put the thing back together. The hiss still came, sometimes once or twice a minute, lasting a few seconds, sometimes not even that. Maybe you missed something, I told myself. I was just about to take the fucker apart again when I thought, maybe I better check another terminal in the same system. Same problem. I was just about to tear Dredger Corp's whole system apart when something dawned on me. Maybe it wasn't just in this system, but in other places as well." "And?" Hammond nodded. "Everyone's picking it up, but nobody's noticing. It's not a problem with one system. It's an electromagnetic pulse, weak and irregular, broadcasting from somewhere." "So, what is it?" "I did some investigating," said Hammond, ignoring Altman's question. "I set up a few receivers, triangulated the pulse. It's irregular enough that it took me a little while to figure out where it's coming from. And when I did, I decided it couldn't be right. So I moved the receivers, triangulated again, And this time I was sure of where it was coming from. Where? Hammond leaned even further in, putting his arm around Altman's shoulders, bringing his lips close to Altman's ear. Remember, he whispered, you didn't hear this from me. Altman nodded. From the crater, whispered Hammond, from the exact center of Chicxulub crater, under a kilometer or two of muck and rock, right where you found your anomaly. Oh my God, said Altman. He explained to Hammond what Ada had been hearing. 3 different things, he said, all of them leading back to Chicxulub crater. Hammond leaned back, nodding his head. My thoughts exactly, he said. Maybe the pulse has been there all the time and nobody noticed it until now. Maybe we're only hearing it now because our equipment is more sensitive. But I think I would have noticed it before now. That's not the kind of thing I miss. Here's my question to you. Is it a pulse or a signal? A signal? It's a little irregular, but it still has a pattern to it. I can't swear to it, but I think it's something that's being deliberately made. Down there, under millions of tons of water and rock. That doesn't make any sense, said Altman. No, agreed Hammond, and it gets stranger. He came in close again, and this time Altman saw something in his eyes, a haunted look. I told Dredger Corp about the pulse. Figure it's my job to do so. I don't want them blaming me for it. I want to make it clear that it's something that everybody is experiencing, even if no one's noticing it. And what do you think they say? What? Have you told anybody else? That's an exact quote. Before I know it, they've got me signing a gag order. In exchange for certain monetary considerations, I can't talk about the pulse. Not to anybody. I haven't, until now, with you. What do you think it means? Asked Altman. What do you think it means? Let me ask you something. Who is the only person that a secure communication system isn't secure from? Who? The guy who installs it. From me. If you're putting a system in, you can loop yourself into it a dozen different ways without anybody being the wiser. I do that from time to time. As a matter of course, just to keep my wrist limber. A hobby, really. His voice grew almost inaudible. I did it with Dredger Corp. And? It didn't last long, he said. 10 days after I put the system in, they tore it out, flew someone in from the North American sector to do it, someone in-house this time. They must have known the system wasn't secure. No way for them to tell, said Hammond. They couldn't have known for sure. They're onto something. There's something at the bottom of the crater, something valuable, maybe even something unique. Lots of speculation about it from the communications I was able to intercept, but after about 3 days, things went cryptic. They started coding everything. He reached into his pocket, took out his holopod. Take a look at this, he said. Up close. Don't let anyone see. What is it? Asked Altman. You tell me. Altman shielded the holopod in his hands, watched the image that appeared, rotating slowly between his palms. It was just a digitally imaged representation. It was impossible to know what it was made of or what it looked like exactly, but he could get at least some idea. A shimmering, 3-dimensional shape in 2 parts, thick at the base and coming to 2 points near the top. It was clearly something man-made rather than a natural formation, no doubt about that. Or was that just the digital model making him think that? It reminded him of something. It looked like 2 separate strands, joined at the bottom but twisted around each other, though it might have been a single tapering structure with a perforated center. He stared at it a long time, watching it slowly turn. And then he remembered. It was the shape Ada had made with her fingers, crossing them over each other, the sign she'd said many of the villagers were now making. Tale of the devil, he whispered, not realizing he'd said anything aloud until he saw Hammond's startled expression. He clicked the holopod off, handed it back to Hammond. I got that off the comm system before they tore it out, Hammond said. According to the message appended to it, they cross-indexed all the information. They had worked with the pulse and the anomaly and probably some other things that neither you nor I are aware of yet. And this is what they came up with. This is what it's at the heart of the crater. They sat in silence a while, staring at their glasses. So a pulse starts up, said Altman finally. Maybe a signal of some sort. Something at the center of the crater that appears to be not a natural geological formation, but a man-made one. Constructed, yes, said Hammond. But who's to say man-made? If not man-made, then... said Altman. And then suddenly he got it. Shit, he said. You think it's something inhuman. Something alien. I don't know what I think, said Hammond. But yes, that's what some of the folks at Dredger Corp thought. Altman shook his head. I don't know, he said. He looked nervously around the bar. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Why me? Hammond jabbed his chest again with his finger. Because you were asking. This stuff has been going on for a while, he said. Others must have noticed it. But you're the only one who contacted everyone you thought might have the answer. You know what that tells me? That you don't work for anyone. That you want to know for yourself. Surely other people are thinking about it too. Let me put it this way, said Hammond. Someone is trying to suppress this. Maybe Dredger Corp? Maybe someone bigger than that. A lot of people know what's happening, but nobody's talking about it. Why? Because they've been bought. Why did I talk to you? Because I don't think you've been bought. He drained his bottle dry, then gave Altman a steady stare. At least, not yet, he said. Okay, so we've got some confirmations. So we now know that what is in this crater is definitely some kind of marker. Oh my god, the Brethren Moons have TikToks. That's what it is. So there's definitely a marker in this crater. The item that there is some sort of like geographical imaging or something is very clearly a marker just based on the description. Have we discussed how moist the hole is? I've been half-conscious sicky. This hole is underwater, so it is incredibly moist. About as moist as you can get for a hole. It's so moist. I gotta change my sitting position. 1 second. Okay. Now, we've met the communications expert, whose name is... What's his name again? Charles Hammond. He is a very secretive boy. He has been monitoring everything having to do with this, trying to go behind the back of the corporation. Oh, God, excuse me. The corporation that he's technically not supposed... He, for the longest time, was technically not supposed to know he was working for. And sought out Altman, specifically because Altman was asking about it. With his logic being that the people who know about it, but have been bought by, like... you know, whatever the corporation du jour is, are not asking questions. But if somebody is asking questions, it means that they haven't been told by whoever they're working for not to fucking ask questions yet. So that's where his logic is coming from. Now, the name of the corporation that Charles mentions here is actually one that if you've played through the entirety of the Dead Space series, you should be at least a little familiar with. Dredger Corp. Oh, hold on. Now, Dredger Corp is a corporation of shady boys. They like to... As previously established, there's a bit of a resource crisis going on right now. And Dredger Corp makes a point of seeking out untapped deposits of resources and minerals, swooping in without getting all the proper, permissions and everything, grabbing up everything they can, and then leaving once they get in trouble. Sort of a better to ask forgiveness than permission sort of business structure. which, you know, is exactly like most major civilized countries today, and exactly what we do. Very touch and go, exactly. Now, Dredger Corp doesn't factor into a lot of the Dead Space games themselves. We don't really hear about a lot of like major corporations outside of like maybe the CEC. But Dredger Corp actually is 100% canonized in Dead Space 3. Because in Dead Space 3, when you start that game on Earth's lunar colony, a colony on the moon. And there is a necromorph breakout. And you are tasked with meeting up... Well, no, there isn't a necromorph breakout yet, but unitologists are going fucking nuts and killing people. And you are tasked with meeting up with EarthGov's last battalion at the top of the Dredger Corp building. So, 300 years from now, Dredger Corp is still going to be a thing. Which sounds impressive, but then you also gotta remember that, like... what's a good example here? Nintendo's been around since, like, the late 1800s. So, it's not too out of the ordinary that certain companies would probably still be around in 300 years, especially if we're working on the idea that humanity has completely fucking stagnated in the time. Okay, so Hammond has... and I think Hammond is also the surname of one of the dudes in Dead Space 1, if I remember right. But Hammond has discovered something. There is an irregular yet steady pulse that is being detected by his communications equipment. And because he's kind of a neurotic fucking guy... We as a society should start using the moon's proper name. She deserves it. What, Luna? Maybe call the sun Sol? Like, literally every other sci-fi... Like, that's the thing that always gets me. It's just like, okay. Like, I get it. We named the moons of other planets. We named the stars of other solar systems and stuff like that. I don't know. I think if we're going to name our own moon and our own sun, we should come up with something better than Luna and Sol. Like, that just seems lazy. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. So, he's kind of Hammond's kind of an neurotic individual. And he's a perfectionist. So when he notices something weird, like an irregular yet steady pulse causing a hiss on the line, he's just like, don't like that. And so he takes shit apart, puts it back together, cleans it, fixes it, and he's still getting this pulse. Now, having worked for a communications company, I can tell you that's just indicative of water getting into the lines that you're using to run these communications. But I'm assuming that maybe they've probably figured that out over the course of like a century, so maybe that's not what's happening. But then you combine this with the gravity fluctuations and the rapid changes in folklore with the native peoples of the Yucatan Peninsula, and suddenly you maybe feel like you're dealing with something a little bit bigger than what you expected. So this is why Hammond has reached out to Altman. It's just like, hey man, let's be secretive boys together. Let's be secret boys together on this. What do you say? What do you say, Altman? Okay. We're going to go ahead and check back with Chava. This is about a really quick sort of like 2-page chapter we got here. And once we finish this and the recap for it, we'll see where we're at. I might go ahead and end the stream. We're really close to part 2 of the book. So, hi, hon.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good.
How was your day?
It was fine.
That's good.
I ate a Whataburger.
You ate a Whataburger?
Yay.
All right, well, I might see about finishing the next 2 chapters and then ending the stream there.
Okie dokie, the thing is at 3.
The thing is at 3. I am aware, so I'm going to go ahead and try and do this as quick as possible.
Okay.
Okay.
Go.
I'm going. It was only once he was walking back... Fuck! I already fucked it up. It was only once he Fuck! It was only once he was walking the Bruja back to her shanty that things really stopped making sense. One moment she was there, walking beside him, talking softly to him, and then the next she was gone. Not only was she gone, but as he looked back, the only tracks in the sand were his own. Well, you see, young Chava, that is where she carried you. No. He went on ahead to her shanty. Perhaps she had left him and gone there. Perhaps he had simply not... Perhaps he had simply not been paying attention. When he arrived, he rapped lightly on the crumpled sheet of tin that served in lieu of a door. Nobody answered. He knocked again, harder this time. Still no answer. He knocked again, and again. Still no answer. In the end, curiosity won out over fear. He took a deep breath and carefully pulled the sheet of tin aside, far enough for him to duck inside. It was dark. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust. At first he couldn't see anything except the shaft of light entering through the crack of the door. But he smelled something. A rich and pungent smell, almost metallic. What is this music? The hell is... what? Oh, this is Titan Station Elementary. When did we switch into Dead Space 2? I definitely was supposed to put that last one on loop. Whatever. But he smelled something, a rich and pungent smell, almost metallic. He couldn't quite place it. Then slowly he began to make out dim shapes. A table scattered with indistinct objects. A basin turned over on the packed earth floor. There, at the far end of the room, he saw a straw and grass pallet, and on it, under a tattered blanket, the shape of a body. He called out to her, "Bruja!" The form in the bed didn't move. He moved slowly across the room until he stood just over the bed. Cautiously he reached out and touched the form through the blanket, shook it slightly. "It's me," he said. "Chava." She was on her side. He tugged her over, flipped her onto her back, and the blanket slipped down to reveal the Bruja's wide staring eyes and her slit throat. He found a box of matches with shaking fingers, lit the lamp on the floor beside the bed. He pulled the blanket off, saw the knife she held in her death-clenched fist. The blade was brown with her blood. Carefully tugged the knife free and laid it flat on the bed beside her. Her other hand, he saw, was badly cut, long gashes on each of the fingers. Ishtab, he thought. He picked up the lamp and held it close to her face. The cut was jagged and incomplete, with the bluish white of her trachea jutting out. She had been dead for some time, hours at least, maybe days. The smell in the room, he realized, was the smell of her blood. How was this possible? He'd just been with her. Or thought he had. Shaking his head, he turned and made for the door, then suddenly stopped. In the lamplight, he saw something else. The walls were covered with crude symbols, like nothing he'd ever seen. Odd, twisting shapes, inscribed in blood. Shocked, he stared at them. Slowly, voices crept into his head, the Brujas among them. He turned and fled. So the Bruja's fucking dead. And has been dead this whole time. But wait. Then what was all that? It's markers. Marker did it. This kid's going nuts. And he's seeing dead people. That's pretty common, actually. It's a pretty common thing that people who are a bit touched by the marker see dead people. Isaac saw Nicole several times over the course of 2 games. Kine was recorded as seeing his wife. Vincent saw Ramirez at the end of Dead Space Downfall. So on and so forth, ad infinitum. People see dead people. It happens. Now, that basically what we're looking at here is that everyone involved in the killing of the Weezer were all basically just under the influence of the marker and all hallucinating, or at least Chava was hallucinating the Bruja. Let's see, Bruja. It's unclear exactly how many people may have been hallucinating the Bruja. We know that she was alive at one point because otherwise Chava's mother probably would not have suggested that he go find her. Now, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, his mother is the one that told him that the Bruja had been alive since the time of the Mayans, over 1,000 years. Now, this could potentially mean that his mother wasn't talking about the quote unquote the Bruja may not even necessarily be anyone of particular note. It might just be, she might not be talking about the Bruja when she says them. She was been here since the time of the Mayans. She might be talking about the marker. And the Bruja was just the face the marker was using for this particular situation. We may never know. Or maybe we will. I don't remember how this book goes. Let's get to the next chapter. I gotta finish up part 1. Phantom Blood. Phantom Necro. After Altman had left, Hammond stayed on drinking. His head ached. Had it been wise to tell Altman? Had he been right about him? Maybe he was a free agent, but then again, if he were someone fishing for information, wouldn't that be exactly what they'd want him to think? That he was talking to someone who was safe? But you couldn't be sure that anybody was safe. You couldn't be sure that someone wasn't watching you right at that moment. They were always watching, always looking, and the moment you felt safest was probably the moment they were watching you the most closely, most sneakily. The moment when they'd figured out how to worm into your skull. That's what they must have done. They must have implanted a recorder in his skull. His head hurt. It had been hurting for several days now. Why hadn't he seen it before? They were recording his brain waves. Then they transmitted them to some super secret high-tech neural lab somewhere and plugged them into someone else's head, and then he knew everything he was thinking. The only thing to do was not think. If he stopped thinking, maybe he could keep one step ahead of them. Someone was coming across the room toward him. A large man with a bushy mustache and a wrinkled, liver-spotted face. Must be one of them. He tensed his body, but remained motionless. Was there time to get the knife in his pocket and flick it open and stab the guy? No, probably not. But he had the beer bottle in his hand. Maybe he could throw it at the man's head. If he threw it hard enough and just right, it might knock him out. Or, no, wait, he could grab the bottle by the neck and break it off. Then he'd have a real weapon. They'd never take him alive. Senor, the man said, a concerned look on his face. Is anything the matter? What was that voice? Is familiar. The owner of the bar. What was his name? Mendez or something. He relaxed. What was wrong with him? It was just the bartender. He shook his head. Why was he so paranoid? He didn't usually get like that, did he? I'm all right, he said. I'd like another beer. I'm sorry, said the owner. We are closing. And indeed, when he looked around, he saw that he was almost the last one in the bar. Everyone was gone except for one villager, the nameless town drunk who was sunk in the corner of the room, wrapped in a dark shawl, watching him. Hammond nodded. He stood and made for the door. The drunk followed him with his eyes. Don't pay any attention to him, Hammond thought. He's not one of them. He's just a drunk. They haven't gotten to him yet. Probably. Take a deep breath. You're going to be okay. He made it out into the dusty street okay. He could hear the surf against the shore, could smell the salt as well. What now? He wondered. What else? And then he thought, home. He was about halfway back to the complex he lived in, walking down a deserted street, when he heard something. At first, he wasn't sure he'd heard anything meaningful at all. It was just a clattering sound and might have been caused by an animal. When he stopped, he didn't hear it. When he started up again, there it was, little traces of it, like a voice he couldn't quite hear in his head. After half a block more, he was sure. Someone was dogging his footsteps. He turned around but didn't see anyone. He quickened his step a little. There seemed to be whispers coming from the shadows in front of him, but as he approached them, they faded, continuing on farther along the road. He shook his head. That's crazy, he thought. I'm going crazy. He heard again a noise behind him and wheeled around again, this time seeing someone, a dark form, a little distance away. He stopped, stared at it. It had stopped moving, and then as suddenly as it had appeared, it stepped back into the shadows and was gone. Hello? He couldn't stop himself from saying. Is anyone there? His heart began to thud in his throat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his knife, opened the blade. It looked absurdly small, almost useless in his hand. He started back towards the shadow where the figure had disappeared, then realized that was probably exactly what they wanted him to do. He turned quickly around to continue the way he had been going. Except when he turned around, he found the street in front of him wasn't empty anymore. There were 3 men, 2 of them quite large, all faces he recognized from the Dredger Corp facility.
Hammond,
said the smallest one, the only one of them wearing glasses.
Charles Hammond.
Who wants to know? Said Hammond.
Someone would like to have a word with you, he said. Come with us.
Who?
I'm not at liberty to say,
the man said. I'm not on the clock, Hammond claimed. Business hours are long over. You're on the clock for this, said another of the men. He nodded. He pretended to relax, beginning to move toward them, then suddenly spun on a heel and ran as quickly as he could in the other direction. Shouts rang out behind him. He ducked into an alley and ran down it, a ragged dog barking at his heels for half the length of it. He leapt over a makeshift fence and crashed through a pile of trash. Up and running again, he left the streets of the town proper and entered the shantytown. His head was throbbing. He looked back. They were still behind him, gaining. He kept running, a stitch starting up his side, slower now, but still running. By the time he reached the edge of the shantytown, they were close enough that he could hear the sound of their labored breathing. They're going to catch me, he realized. There's nothing I can do. He stopped suddenly, whirled around, holding the small knife in front of him. The 3 men quickly fanned out, forming a triangle around him. Hammond, panting, kept moving the knife back and forth from one hand to the other. The others kept their distance, their hands up.
There's no need for that, said the man with glasses. They just want to talk to you.
Who's they?
Come on, said the man with glasses. Be a good boy and put down the knife.
What's wrong with him, Tom? Asked the first of the other 2. He's scared, Tim, said Tom. I'd be scared if I was him too, said Tim. Nobody likes a thief. Thief? Can you really steal secrets? Said Tom.
Now, boys, said the man with the glasses, you're not helping the situation.
There they were again, the voices in his head. Why did they need to send voices into his head if they were there in front of him? Then a terrible thought occurred to Hammond. What if there were 2 groups out to get him? Dredger Corp and another one as well. Or maybe even 3 or 4. What do they want with him? Would they beat him? Would they kill him? Would it be even worse than that?
Now just calm down, said the man with glasses,
looking a little nervous now. Someone, Hammond realized, was making a noise, a high-pitched squealing. It was a terrible thing to hear. It took him a long moment to realize that someone was himself. I told you there was something wrong with him, he heard Tim say behind him. You're right about that, Tim, said Tom. They were still there, the 3 of them, standing in a way that made it impossible for him to see all of them at once. He could turn and turn, but he couldn't see them all at the same time, no matter what he did. And then there were the ones in his head, too, slowly extracting things from him. God, his head hurt. He had to stop them, had to get them out of his head.
Put the knife down, friend,
said the man with the glasses. But that was the last thing Hammond was going to do. Instead, he lunged forward and flashed his knife at the man with glasses. The man jumped nimbly back, but not nimbly enough. The knife opened a gash just below his wrist. He stood holding it, blood dripping through his fingers, his face suddenly pale in the dim light. But Hammond had forgotten about the others. He turned, and there they were, still a little way away, but moving closer. They stepped quickly back when they realized they'd been noticed. He was still surrounded, both inside his head and outside it. There was no getting out of it. He would never get away. And so, realizing this, heart thudding in his mouth, he did the only thing he could think to do. "I didn't expect that, Tim," said Tom. "I didn't either," said Tim. "This one was full of surprises. What do they want for him? What do they want him for, anyway?" he asked the man with the glasses. "A few questions," said the man with the glasses. "Nothing serious. Just a few questions." He had wrapped his wrist in one of his shirt tails. It was slowly soaking through with blood. "Never seen anything quite like that," said Tom. "I hope I never do again." "Same here," said Tim, shaking his head. He took a step back to avoid the puddle of blood that was spreading from Hammond's slit neck. He'd never seen anyone cut themselves quite so deep and so quickly. There was a lot of blood, and it was still coming. He had to step back again. How could anyone do that to himself? Tim wondered. He must have been very frightened. Or simply crazy. Or both. He squinted, massaged his temple. "All right, Tim?" asked Tom. Better than him, anyway." "All right, Tim?" asked Tom. "Better than him, anyway," said Tim. "Just a little headache." "Me too," said Tom. "Terry?" "I got a headache, too," said the man with glasses. "Been one of those nights. Step lively, lads. Let's get out of here before the law arrives." All right, so let's wrap this up with one more recap here. So we've met 3 more characters. We've met Tim, Tom, and Terry. So Tim and Tom, from the sound of things, sound like they're probably twins, just based on the way that they talk to each other and the way that their physical descriptions are given. Now, there's a pretty common thing in the Dead Space series of just weird twin guys and weird twin folks. There's a bunch of them in goddamn Dead Space Aftermath, just working the interrogation ship. And then I think there's the guys who go after Lexine in Dead Space Severed, I'm pretty sure. Tom and Terry, that famous cat and mouse. Exactly. Now, these guys are almost comical from the sound of things, because Tom and Tim, they do the weird, creepy twin thing where they're just constantly have a rapport with each other, just kind of bouncing back and forth off each other. Now, Terry, he's just little. He's just a little guy. It's his birthday. He's a little birthday boy. But they are identified by Hammond as people from Dredger Corp. So these guys, and they're here because they want to take him in. And Tim and Tom kind of let it slip a little bit that he's maybe in trouble for stealing secrets. Potentially. But in the end, Terry reveals that, it really wasn't anything so serious. They just needed to ask him a few questions. But at that point, it's too late for any explanations because... Hold on. Because Hammond's fucking dead. Hammond kills himself. And it's not particularly clear if he realized what he was doing. There's a point where, he's got his knife out, obviously. And he makes note of the fact that Terry seems to be a little bit nervous. Now, at the time, like, there hasn't been any mention that he has taken up a particularly, like, threatening stance or anything, and he's had the knife out this entire time. So the knife isn't, like, a new element in the encounter or anything. But it seems like Hammond, potentially without realizing, has become slightly more threatening over the course of this encounter with Tim, Tom, and Terry. And so it can then be inferred. So he rushes Terry, manages to cut Terry on the wrist, and then he thinks to himself, like, well, only one more thing to do. And then he fucking kills himself. And it's like, it's not really the text, because from at that point it's like a third person focused narration. It's third person, but we're mostly in Hammond's head for the duration of that section of the chapter. And the way that Hammond talks about the situation doesn't necessarily sound like he is on the verge of just offing himself so that they don't take him in and do whatever he thinks he's going to have, like, done to him. So this could be one of those things. Hammond is pretty clearly being affected by the marker. He's paranoid. Paranoia is pretty common. He's seeing things. And he seems to be acting in ways that he is not aware of. It is, I would say, within reason to assume that he probably wasn't necessarily planning to just off himself. And that could have potentially been an issue of marker influence. But Hammond's fucking dead, which means that the only other person who even was really bothering to investigate this oddity within the Chicxulub crater is now gone. Altman is on his own. And next week, we will find out, in part 2, where things go from here. I want to thank everybody for coming by the stream. I hope you all had a good time. I know I did. If you enjoyed the stream, you could subscribe here on Twitch. We have special emotes for subscribers. You can also follow me on Twitter at sane_intolerant or on YouTube at youtube.com/saneintolerant, where I post all the streams after they happen. Art for the stream, the VTuber avatar was made by Team Catpull, whose handle you can see on screen right now. You can find them at Team Catpull on Twitter and Twitch and YouTube. Don't email them yet. Not yet. Don't do it. They'll let you know. They'll let you know when you can email. There's also credits for the photo used for the book club space on screen as well. And the game that was on screen today is Dead Space 1, which you can pick up digitally on both the Xbox and the PC. I think right now the only thing that you can get through like the PlayStation Now streaming service is Dead Space 3 for the PS3. I highly recommend checking out Dead Space 1. The whole Dead Space series is, quite honestly, probably one of my favorite horror franchises, despite how, like, kind of shockingly short-lived it ended up being. But I am excited that we did actually get an announcement recently for the release date for Dead Space Remake. It's going to be released in January of 2023, and I am hoping at that point I will have finished playing through all of the other games in the series so that when the remake comes out, we can take a fresh look at that. I also play all 3 games on Game Pass through EA Play. That is also true. They are also available on EA Play. I don't think even like just on Xbox, but I also don't know how the PC stuff works because I'm not a big PC gamer, but you can get them through Game Pass. I would, again, just honestly recommend every game in the series. I think Extraction is, of course, also available. You can get like the Wii version, or you can play the PS3 version through PlayStation Now. Upcoming streams: Wednesday, Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Thursday, God of War 3. Friday, I'm going to be on the Team Capital stream. We're going to be doing Jackbox, possibly other games, so tune in to their stream for that. The next Saturday, we're going to be reading more Dead Space Martyr. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I will see you next time on the Sharkstream. Same Shark time, same Shark channel. Also, the chalkboard was done by Natalie, who's where you can find on Twitter at GhostyNaps, GHOSTIENAPS.
And I'm hovering.
She is hovering. I need to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Hope you have a good one. Take care. And I'm backing up, backing up, backing up.